In this video, we're going to talk about red states and blue states. The terms red state and blue state are used in the context of presidential elections to describe the political leaning of a state. A red state, for example, is a state like Texas, Kansas, or Oklahoma that is typically won by the Republican candidate. Conversely, a blue state, California, Oregon, or Washington, is a state that is more often won by the Democratic candidate. However, these terms can be misleading. Consider the population density. In that large map where we see big chunks of red and blue, what's missing from that is the fact that most of that is just empty space. Where the people live is perhaps more instructive. In this map of the 2020 election, each dot represents 250,000 votes for each candidate. Get a very different picture. Most of the map, as we see, is unpopulated, and the votes for each candidate are clustered in specific areas. Democratic votes, for example, seem to be clustered around dense urban areas. Republican votes, conversely, seem to be spread out in more diffuse, sparsely populated rural areas. Here's an example. Consider the 2018 Senate election in Texas. This is a statewide election, and Texas is typically considered a red state, often won by the Republican candidate. However, in this election, over 8 million votes, the margin of victory was just over 200,000 votes. That is a very close election. And we can see the split by population. Most of the votes for Senator Cruz were spread out around the rural areas. A lot of the votes for Beto O'Rourke, conversely, were around the urban areas. This reflects the demographic breakdown that we see, the geographic distribution, but also the fact that the actual vote totals are relatively balanced. Might not be right to call Texas a red and blue state, a red or blue state. Might be more accurate to call it a purple one. And many states would more accurately be described as different shades of purple. There are a few solid red and solid blue states, but for the rest of them, the population is a little closer to 50-50. Florida, for example. Florida is pretty consistently a red state. It is won by the Republican candidate more often than not. However, in the 2020 election, over 11 million votes, the margin of victory was just under 300,000 votes. That's still pretty close. When we think of the population, that is 5 million votes for the Democratic candidate. Even though this is a red state, the half of the population, half the electorate, still votes Democratic. So just to recap, the notion of red states and blue states might not be that accurate. Most states represent a shade of purple. They are an almost equal balance of Republican and Democratic voters. Now, the big difference here is the geographic distribution. A lot of the Democratic votes tend to be clustered in large urban areas, whereas the Republican votes tend to be spread out in more sparsely populated rural areas.